was another find off of eBay. The original linen is the white part surrounded by the brown embroidery. I was lucky enough to get it for $12. It did appear in an article from Machine Quilting Unlimited discussing how to make whole cloth linen quilts as well as regular whole cloth quilts. The main designs, all the pink is so fine thread. You can see how it shows up just a little bit more. All of the background scribbling, all of the cathedral window work, all the feather details was done with bottom line thread. You can also see where I've stitched in the ditch on both sides of all of the cut work in order to make the design pop. And I scribbled in every stinking hole of all of this bridge work. It was quite a task, but it came through at the end where it really turned out nice. I also added little miniature freshwater pearls to all the flowers on the centers just to add a little bit of a pop. The linen itself was placed on top of pink Dupioni silk. And I want to show the back just to show you again what the bottom line does. You can see how heavily the front is quilted. The back, you're still seeing the fabric, you're not seeing the thread. So it shows how well that thread blends. This particular piece started out as a Christmas present given to me by my daughter Emily. So I've called it Emily's Treasures. The linen is this very wobbly old white linen that she gave me. It had the gorgeous gold embroidery on it, but it also had several thumb-size holes in the middle of it. You can see where I've tried to repair them. The fabric was shredding and dying. I repaired them enough so that I could turn it into a whole cloth quilt. I chose highlights threads for my main quilting designs around the stars and the feathers. I like the shine because it picked up the same shine that's in the original embroidery. Because of the shine here, I did place it on Radiance fabric. The highlights thread carries that light through, and I added my designs going over the top of both fabrics. You can see how uneven and how wobbly this linen is. That drives some people absolutely crazy. But in my opinion, the wobbliness, the stains, the holes are all part of the charm. They're part of the history of the piece. And I think it lends itself to the character. I added a few beads in the middle of the flowers to add a little bit of texture. Again, they're all done by hand with bottom line thread. And I added just a very delicate little sparkle to the cathedral windows in the middle. I'm still trying to carry the light from the inside to the outside. This is also, this will be a little bit upside down, but you can see how I signed this. Again, I'm using a coaster, showing that it's Emily's Treasure, how I got the linen, and then I'm adding the pearls to the back as well. So be sure to take the time to document your quilts and the stories. At least this is not a whole cloth linen quilt, but it is a whole cloth quilt. I was inspired from this beautiful quilt at Pacific International last year that was made by a quilter in Ireland. And she did this gorgeous queen size whole cloth quilt with gold thread, and I couldn't get enough of that quilt, so I wanted to make a sample for myself that I could use for teaching. I use this a lot in my design class. I use it in the open thread bar. I'm demonstrating how we can use bottom line for our details. I've used metallic thread doubled over for my stars. Remember how we talked about to do our feathers with the bananas and stacking? I've done all three here, and you can see how stacking the spine really adds some pop to your feathers. The cathedral window design was done for my background, and I scribbled in every stinking hole. That gives me the pop, but then I also added little glass beads that had a gold touch to them in the middle, so that's also adding shadow. I call this one Feathered Crystals, and as I'm creating my new whole cloth quilts, I'm writing books on how to create these too. So be sure and check my website for Okay, last but not least, this is my purple silk Dupioni quilt. When I talk about this in class, I like to share the story. Heather Purcell from Superior Threads asked me to do a quilt for Superior, and she wanted it bright and she wanted colors, and oh, I was thrilled to be able to do it. So I got all the marking done, and I emailed her and I said, okay, I'm ready for the threads. A few days later, I got home from work and there's this little box on my doorstep. and it was the threads, and I could swear it was glowing. I opened it up, and there were these at that time, I thought they were horrid, orange and raspberry and green threads, and I called her up and I said, "You've made a horrible mistake. I can't believe you expect me to use these threads." And she said, "Trust me, they will be beautiful. The silk is just screaming for bright threads." I was in a wad the next day when I taught a class, and I brought the silk and I showed them the threads that she sent. So one of my students said, "This is what you do." They took all the threads off the spool, they threw them down on the silk, and it was amazing. I have fallen in love with the bright threads ever since. I can't get enough of them. So this is my very first Superior silk quilt, and it's my very first experience ever using colored threads. There's a lot of things that I would do different now. I've learned a lot. This was done almost, 4 or 5 years ago. But in order to cover up some of the mistakes, I decided to add beads. This is my first beaded quilt, and I've created a monster. So I have jillions of little tiny beads and the clams, and it just carried forward through the entire quilt. But I love using the bright threads. I challenge my students to use them. Everybody falls in love with them. This was also a demo quilt for me at Pacific International. And so I decided to use the same colored threads on the top and the bottom. So I've got to show you the surprise on the back. This is the back of the quilt. This is a blue Dupioni silk, and we had a hard time figuring out which side we wanted on the front and which side we wanted on the back. But it shows you, again, how the bright threads will react with the bright fabric and how well the threads show off the fabric. Any other thread that had blended would not have done the silk justice. So in closing, I would like to thank Bob and Heather from Superior Threads, because if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be a tenth of the quilter that I am today. They've got me out of my box. They've taught me how to enjoy color, how to use the threads, how to get better. I'm thrilled to have been chosen to be a national educator for Superior. I travel all over the country teaching for guilds and for shops and for special groups. I'm available for teaching all over the country year-round. You can visit my website at cindyneedham.com. It will give you my information on how to contact me, and I would love to come to your guild to teach. I do speak for the guilds for their programs. I present Bob's program, Thread Facts and Fiction, and I bring a lot of my quilts for fondling too, and I bring the same quilts to my workshops. I'm also self-publishing all of my handbooks. All of my classes, I have handbooks for sale. Those are available on my website, so I invite you to visit there. And if you're ever in the mood for an outstanding retreat, you've got to come join me in McLeod, California. So thank you very much.